Mrs. Foster, I don't feel right. My insulin pump, it doesn't seem to be working.
Oh my God, Miss Martinez. Your blood sugar is definitely sky.
Flight crew ignored veterans' medical emergency. Navy medical team landed to investigate. When Navy veteran Sarah Martinez's insulin pump malfunctioned during Flight 447, Chief Flight Attendant Monica Wells dismissed her distress as attention-seeking behavior. Her decision to ignore a 3-hour diabetic crisis would trigger a military medical investigation that grounded the crew permanently. United Airlines Flight 4411 from San Antonio to Norfolk pushed back from the gate into the humid Texas evening, its 180 passengers settling in for the 3-hour journey. The Boeing 737's cabin hummed with familiar travel sounds. Overhead bins snapping shut, seatbelts clicking, and gentle air conditioning whoosh mixing conversations and rustling magazines. Sarah Martinez sat quietly in seat 14C, her Navy dress uniform impeccably pressed despite the long day at Lackland Air Force Base, where she'd been honored at a retirement ceremony. At 52, Senior Chief Petty Officer Martinez carried herself with the composed bearing of someone who had spent 28 years managing complex submarine logistics. But tonight, she felt unusually drained. Sarah was traveling home to Norfolk Naval Station for final out-processing before officially retiring next week. The ceremony had been emotional. Recognition for her service, including 2 deployments supporting submarine operations, and her role training the next generation of Navy specialists. She'd managed her type 1 diabetes flawlessly throughout her military career, never missing duty due to her condition. The small insulin pump attached to her belt had been her lifeline for 8 years, automatically delivering precise insulin doses based on her programmed settings. Sarah checked it routinely, but today's ceremony stress and irregular schedule had made her less vigilant about her usual monitoring routine. What Sarah didn't immediately realize was that her insulin pump had developed a mechanical malfunction during the ceremony. The tubing had developed a microscopic kink that was gradually reducing insulin delivery without triggering the device's alarm system. Her blood glucose was beginning to rise slowly but steadily, and without adequate insulin, her body would eventually begin breaking down fat for energy, producing dangerous ketones. Sarah had successfully managed her diabetes through submarine deployments, high-stress operations, and demanding military schedules. Her pump had never failed before, and she'd grown confident in its reliability. The gradual malfunction was insidious, not dramatic enough to trigger immediate alarms, but serious enough to create a medical emergency over several hours. Chief Flight Attendant Monica Wells was facing the worst performance review of her 12-year United Airlines career. Recent passenger complaints about her service attitude, a written warning for policy violations, and news about potential layoffs had left her defensive and cynical about passenger requests. She dealt with attention-seeking behavior and passengers who expected special treatment, making her skeptical of medical claims. The Lackland ceremony had been unexpected honor. Sarah's commanding officer had nominated her for the Navy's Distinguished Service Award, recognizing her contributions to submarine logistics. The recognition meant traveling during her final week of active duty, disrupting her careful transition routine and diabetes management schedule. The decision to accept had been difficult. Sarah was eager to begin civilian life with her partner in Virginia Beach, but the award represented validation of nearly 3 decades of service. The ceremony's emotional intensity combined with irregular meal timing and travel stress, had created subtle disruptions to her glucose management that she hadn't immediately recognized. Sarah's preparation reflected military attention to detail. She'd packed backup insulin supplies, glucose testing equipment, and emergency snacks in her carry-on. Her medical alert bracelet clearly identified her condition, and she carried comprehensive Navy medical documentation, including her diabetes management protocols. She'd programmed her pump for the travel day, accounting for time zone changes and meal schedule disruptions. What she hadn't anticipated was equipment failure. The pump had performed flawlessly for 2 years, and mechanical problems were extremely rare with her model. 90 minutes into the flight, Sarah began feeling subtly unwell, mild nausea, slight fatigue, and increased thirst. Her military training had taught her to monitor her body carefully, and she immediately checked her glucose meter. The reading showed 108 mg/dl, elevated but not immediately dangerous for a diabetic. Sarah examined her insulin pump and noticed the display showed normal operation, though she felt something wasn't quite right. She pressed the call button and waited for assistance. When flight attendant Jennifer Park responded, Sarah explained professionally, "I'm diabetic and my glucose levels are climbing. I'd like to test again and possibly adjust my insulin pump settings." Park, a junior attendant with 2 years' experience, offered assistance and seemed concerned about Sarah's condition. But before Sarah could explain further, Chief Flight Attendant Monica Wells approached with obvious skepticism. "Is there a problem here?" she asked Park, then turned to Sarah with suspicion. Wells examined Sarah's appearance, military uniform, composed bearing, articulate speech, and made a judgment based on her recent experiences with difficult passengers. "Ma'am, you appear fine to me. If you're feeling unwell, please remain seated and use your call button only for genuine emergencies." Sarah maintained composure despite feeling increasingly concerned about her glucose readings. "I understand your position, but I'm a type 1 diabetic, and my levels are rising without apparent cause. I may need medical assistance if this continues." She spoke with the clear precision of someone trained to communicate under stress. Over the next hour, Sarah's condition continued deteriorating. Her glucose readings climbed to 220, then 260 mg/dl. She tested her insulin pump multiple times, but couldn't identify the malfunction. The gradual insulin deficiency was causing her body to begin producing ketones, though not yet at dangerous levels. Other passengers began noticing Sarah's frequent glucose testing and obvious concern. The businessman in 14B offered water when he saw her testing equipment. An elderly woman across the aisle, retired nurse Margaret Foster, recognized the signs of diabetic distress and approached with professional concern. Foster had 40 years of medical experience and immediately understood Sarah was experiencing glucose management problems. "Honey, I'm a registered nurse. Your glucose levels are climbing, aren't they?" When Sarah confirmed readings now approaching 300 mg/dl, Foster pressed the call button immediately. Wells returned, visibly annoyed by repeated calls from the same area. "Ladies, we've addressed this situation. The passenger has her own medical equipment and appears to be managing her condition." Foster challenged Wells directly. "Ma'am, this woman is experiencing diabetic hyperglycemia that could become dangerous without proper intervention." Buok Tien Lon. For a moment, Medical expertise seemed to override bureaucratic dismissal. Foster's professional assessment carried weight Wells couldn't easily ignore. She agreed to retrieve the aircraft's medical kit and contact the pilot about potential medical consultation with ground-based physicians. But when Wells realized that documenting medical intervention could trigger expensive emergency procedures, her recent performance pressure influenced her decision-making. The passenger is conscious, alert, and managing her condition with personal equipment. I don't believe we need emergency protocols at this time. Sarah's glucose levels continued climbing, now reaching 340 mdl after 2.5 hours. Her body was producing ketones at increasing rates, though still below the levels that would cause obvious symptoms like fruity breath. She was becoming increasingly fatigued and experiencing nausea, but remained conscious and articulate. Captain James Rodriguez was monitoring the situation from the cockpit, but relied on his cabin crew's medical assessments. Wells's reports that the situation was under control led him to continue toward Norfolk without declaring emergency procedures. Foster remained at Sarah's side, monitoring her pulse and respiration while growing increasingly concerned about the flight crew's response. Sarah's blood pressure was elevated, her skin was becoming flushed, and her breathing was slightly faster than normal, all signs of diabetic ketosis progression. "Sarah, we need to get the captain involved," Foster said firmly. "Your glucose is over 350 now, and you're showing early signs of ketoacidosis. Without proper insulin, this will become life-threatening." The urgency in Foster's voice reflected her understanding of how diabetic emergencies progressed when left untreated. 3 hours into the flight, Sarah's insulin pump finally triggered its delayed malfunction alarm, a faint beep indicating complete insulin delivery failure. By this point, her glucose levels had reached 380 mdl, and her body was producing ketones at rates approaching dangerous levels. Sarah began experiencing classic ketoacidosis symptoms: severe nausea, vomiting, and increasing confusion. Her breathing became deeper and more rapid as her body attempted to compensate for rising acidity in her blood. Foster immediately recognized the progression to diabetic ketoacidosis, a potentially fatal complication. "Medical emergency!" Foster called loudly, pressing the call button repeatedly. "This woman is going into diabetic ketoacidosis. We need emergency landing and ground medical support immediately." Her professional urgency was unmistakable, but Wells's response revealed dangerous prioritization of operational concerns over medical necessity. This was the moment that would define everyone's actions for the remainder of the flight. Wells faced choosing between acknowledging her hours of medical negligence and continuing to minimize the emergency to protect her career. Foster faced providing emergency medical care while dealing with crew members who had demonstrated poor medical judgment. Sarah, despite increasing confusion from ketoacidosis, understood the gravity of her situation. "My pump failed," she told Foster weakly. "I haven't had insulin for over 3 hours. This is becoming dangerous." Her military training helped her communicate essential information despite her deteriorating condition. Wells, seeing Sarah's obvious distress but still concerned about operational implications, made a decision that revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of medical emergencies. The passenger has been managing her condition throughout the flight. Let's see if she improves before declaring any emergencies. Foster realized the chief flight attendant was actively hindering emergency medical care and made a decision that bypassed normal chain of command. Using her cell phone, she contacted Naval Medical Center Portsmouth, Sarah's home base hospital, where her medical records were maintained. "This is Margaret Foster, RN. I'm providing emergency care to Senior Chief Sarah Martinez on United Flight 447. She's in diabetic ketoacidosis after insulin pump failure, and the flight crew has been ignoring her medical emergency for 3 hours." Foster's professional authority carried weight that civilian authorities couldn't ignore. The Navy medical officer who took Foster's call, Lieutenant Commander Michael Stevens, immediately understood both the medical emergency and legal implications of crew negligence. "Ms. Foster, continue providing care and document everything. I'm contacting our emergency response team and the FAA immediately." Within 20 minutes, Stevens had notified Naval Medical Center Command, the Navy's Inspector General Office, and the FAA's Medical Emergency Investigation Unit. The response he triggered would result in federal investigation of the crew's conduct and immediate review of United Airlines' medical emergency protocols. At 9:15 p.m. Central Time, exactly 3 hours and 18 minutes after Sarah's pump had begun malfunctioning, Flight 447 was executing an emergency landing at Memphis International Airport, while a Navy medical team prepared to investigate the crew's handling of a veteran's medical crisis. Memphis International's emergency response was swift and comprehensive. Paramedics boarded immediately, working with Foster to stabilize Sarah's condition before hospital transport. Sarah was conscious but severely dehydrated, her ketone levels dangerously elevated after hours without adequate insulin. The Navy medical team, led by Captain Patricia Chen from Naval Medical Center Portsmouth, arrived within 4 hours to document the crew's handling of a veteran's medical emergency, not just for medical purposes, but for potential criminal negligence charges. By midnight, United Flight 447's crew faced unprecedented scrutiny from multiple federal agencies. The Navy investigation documented the 3-hour timeline of Sarah's deteriorating condition. The FAA reviewed crew compliance with medical emergency protocols, and United Airlines executives conducted internal investigation of crew performance. Wells faced immediate suspension pending investigation, while crew members were interviewed separately to establish the decision-making timeline. Foster's documentation during the emergency, including glucose readings, symptom progression, and Wells's responses, provided clear evidence of negligent crew conduct. The investigation revealed systemic problems with United's medical emergency training and crew oversight. Wells's dismissal of genuine medical emergency wasn't isolated, but part of a pattern prioritizing operational efficiency over passenger safety. Federal investigators determined whether Wells's actions constituted criminal negligence, FAA safety violations, or both. Sarah's military veteran status added federal oversight from Veterans Affairs and Navy medical personnel, elevating the investigation's scope and potential consequences. Captain Chen's investigation findings carried significant weight with both United Airlines management and FAA officials. Senior Chief Martinez experienced life-threatening diabetic ketoacidosis because flight crew ignored medical emergency for over 3 hours, she stated in her official report. This represents criminal indifference to veteran health and safety. Her military authority and medical expertise triggered immediate industry-wide policy changes and criminal prosecution recommendations against Wells for criminal negligence in handling passenger medical emergencies. At 8:30 a.m. the following morning, Sarah Martinez was stable in Memphis Methodist Hospital, surrounded by Navy medical personnel and her partner, who had flown in from Virginia Beach. Her insulin pump had been replaced, her ketoacidosis treated, and her recovery was complete. Wells was terminated within 24 hours and faced federal criminal charges for criminal negligence. Captain Rodriguez, who had relied on Wells's assessments but ultimately declared the emergency, received mandatory medical emergency retraining but retained his position. Foster was honored by both United Airlines and the Navy for her professional intervention that prevented Sarah's death. Monica Wells was terminated and permanently banned from commercial aviation employment. She faced federal criminal charges resulting in probation and community service. The incident triggered complete overhaul of United's medical emergency protocols, with quarterly mandatory training for all flight crews and automatic medical consultation requirements. The Martinez Standard now requires immediate medical consultation for any passenger reporting serious medical conditions, with escalation procedures that bypass individual crew judgment. Sarah's near-death experience led to federal legislation mandating veteran medical emergency protocols and establishing direct communication between airlines and military medical facilities. Sarah completed her Navy retirement and became an advocate for diabetic veterans' rights, working with airlines to improve medical emergency recognition and response. Margaret Foster's professional courage reminded the aviation industry that passenger safety must override operational convenience, and that medical emergencies require immediate professional response regardless of crew members' personal judgments or career concerns.